Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Clarity from Chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. On this episode, we're going to be examining the state of our economy and the cultural challenges associated with it. In addition, we're going to be discussing the lack of trust in our national leadership and its supporting propagandist, the corporate media. But before we get going, I'd like to share a couple of thoughts. I'd been traveling for the last couple of weeks, and I came upon a store in Seaside, Florida, while I was shopping for my wife's birthday present. The name of the store was Mercantile. What amazed me about this particular store was the posted rules behind the cashier's counter. They were as follows: Merc rules to live by. Number one, it's not happy people who are thankful, it's thankful people who are happy. Number two, have more than you show and speak less than you know. Number three, get on your knees and pray. Then get on your feet and work. Number four, don't look down on anyone unless you are helping them up. And five, always give back because it's always in style. Now, it's amazing how this company was able to summarize a successful life in just 5 short statements. Now, to help us navigate the complex topics that I discussed earlier, we are incredibly pleased to welcome the Director of Communications for the America Small Business League and his efforts in the Don't Cheat Women project, Mr. Bruce Torres. Bruce is also the best-selling author of God's School, 9/11, and JFK. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
David, thank you for having me. So great to meet you.
So let's start out with your thoughts. You know, we've been going on now for 2.5 weeks, possibly going on 3 weeks now with our involvement in Iran with Epic Fury. So how do you think, I know gas prices have come up, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about the economy behind that. So what are your thoughts from your association with the America Business League? What are you seeing out there?
I'm seeing a lot of the same, which is the vast majority of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. I'm seeing a tremendous threat that the conflict could balloon into a cataclysmic impact and rearrangement of things on the scale of COVID-19, on the scale of World War II. There's a great case to be made for that. There's a great case to be terrified about that. But I want to also mention my appreciation of those 5 points you read from the Mercantile store, because our hope is the nature of reality, and our thoughts and intentions and prayers are far more powerful than all the doom and gloom scenarios we can discuss.
Yeah, I would say prayer at this point, if we could collectively get everybody together, Bruce, I think prayer would probably be the defining moment to resolution on a lot of things. But unfortunately, it seems to be difficult to get everybody all on the same page. And I'm not quite sure what that is. For a brief moment after 9/11, we were on the same page. But then that evaporated like the mist, right? It just came and went. You know, everybody harkens back to it. But the feeling of nationalism, of everybody being in the boat, going in the same direction, all at that one moment, was pretty remarkable. So, but I don't know that we're going to be able to recapture that. With the rise in energy prices and then Trump invoking the War Production Act on the West Coast, do you think that's going to get tied up in court, or do you think that there's enough legislation around it that he's going to be able to go ahead and get those drilling platforms back up and functioning before California can shut them down with an activist judge.
Mm, my gosh. I could see a great case made for him having his way with something like that. I could also see it being quickly clogged in the gears of
Yeah,
opposition.
yeah,
Wow, David, I can't answer that.
yeah. I know. When he implemented that, I went, well, that's really interesting, and perhaps that will help, along with them basically breaking the bottle on the first refinery that they've started to build in the last 50 years. But then he no sooner got the words out of his mouth than the governor of California, we're going to take him to court and shut this down and everything else. So I think, it's kind of like all bets are off on who's going to get to first base, right? On
Mhm.
this thing. It's just amazing. So with energy prices up, how long do you think the economy can sustain that? I mean, we're looking at the midterms, right? And everybody, to your point at the beginning, everybody's living paycheck to paycheck. What is the case made for the midterms, do you think, based on where we're at then?
The midterms are 1,000 years away based on where we're at, I think,
Do you?
because yes, because tonight, dawn, tomorrow morning, next week,
Yeah, okay. I get it.
huge things could happen that
Yeah,
impact everything, especially, something as far away as November.
right.
If the midterms were tomorrow, yeah, there's probably a decent enough sense of public sentiment to
Keep going.
imagine,
Yeah,
the outcome if the midterms were tomorrow. But for one who has looked deep into history as much as I have, it's pins and needles. It really, really is pins and needles right now because of what kind of cliff we might soon go over if we haven't already gone over it.
yeah. If we're just, the old adage, yeah, so far so good, right? As you're falling off a five-story building. Um,
Right. It's
you
not the
know,
fall,
it's
it's
not
the
the fall that's yeah, it's the landing. Exactly. It's the landing. So let's talk about your book, God's School in 9/11. I, like you, have great reservation in the ability for the media and um, politicians to manipulate information. And I think the case in point was, you started out with TWA Flight 800, which I think is a stellar example of manipulation. And perhaps you could enlighten the audience on some of your other findings in that book.
Well, thank you. That flight is a great example of something that happened, the official story of which is nonsense. And it's, American beware, human beware.
Right.
The mis and disinformation is overwhelming. And I wrote the book in order to illustrate many official stories and many events in recent history and in past history that are just not as authority teaches us either in school or by the media or modern presidents, and tried to wrap all those nightmares in the good news about the nature of reality, the nature of love. And the book came out about 5 years ago. People can read all about it at my site, brucetotorres.com. And I believe there's a lot of hope in there too, because I show many people like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., who had the courage to pursue good and do the right thing, even though they knew they were confronting forces that kill to win. And a major strategy for you, me, and every human, in my humble opinion, is to grapple with the question of death and get to the point where you're not afraid to die. And many, 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 many really wise people going back centuries make the case. If you're afraid to die, you're afraid to live. So there's a great freedom that comes from committing to do well, live by the truth, no matter what. And it's not easy being human, but when you can make a decision for the truth or for love or for kindness or compassion or sharing or everything that makes a family work, makes a community work, makes a species work, makes a country work, and makes a planet work.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff around the whole issue with JFK that I found extremely interesting and have often wondered, had he not met with an assassin in commas assassins on that fateful day in November, if we had even gotten into further deeper into Vietnam, since the Gulf of Tonkin incident didn't happen until a few months after that, which LBJ took advantage of to escalate the war. I'm just wondering if that war would have been escalated had JFK still lived. And I don't think it would have, based on what he did with the Cuban Missile Crisis and such. I think he was a lot more prudent than that. So, any thoughts around it?
Yeah, his life presidency was the tipping point for me to put a book together. I was so inspired by his greatness and have since concluded, and then you also absorb it by the other authors, that his assassination was a great tipping point, if not the climax of the American story.
Yeah.
Follow this, David. If every story has a beginning, middle, and end, in Western literature, stories often have, that's act one, act two, and act three. The climax of the story isn't the end of the story. It's the confrontation. It's the pivotal confrontation that sets up the ending. Okay. And I posit that America was mortally wounded when President Kennedy was shot. And anyone who survived it, who was alive at that time, has said that consistently. Nothing, I don't mean to scream, nothing has been the same since his assassination. It changed everything, and we were on a slippery slope straight down. And America ended after 9/11 with the imposition of the Department of Homeland Security and the USA Patriot Act over, because it took away, in a blatant way, our constitutional rights. Since we don't have our constitutional rights, David, and we don't live under the Constitution, we are not America. And that's what we have to wrap our heads around. And then we can identify in a visceral way with the founding fathers and the Revolutionary War generation and look at what they did, borrow their courage. And then if you're young and ambitious, or like to pretend you are, because I ain't young, it's to imagine rolling up one sleeves and saying, I get to do that if I choose to. I get to preach and teach the need for that kind of self-reliant self-government,
Right.
and rousing as many of my fellow Americans as possible to these realities. Because a lot of people will hear what I just said and call that conspiracy theories. They don't think it's true. They don't think it's real. But there's a lot of books like mine. There's a lot of podcasters out there and folks
Yeah,
like
there's
you who are exploring this stuff to our great good.
yeah, I agree. And I would counter that they've been boiling the frog now for a number of years, a degree at a time. And just so people don't understand what boiling the frog is, you put a frog in a pot of water, cold water, and you turn it up a degree at a time so that the frog is always comfortable until he's boiled. And I believe that that's what's been going on. And I would predate it even a little before Kennedy's assassination, but they have been boiling the frog a degree at a time. And what we see now culturally is what you just spoke about, is people are just immune, Bruce, to what probably you and I grew up with the constant question of why this and why that, and constantly asking and exploring and challenging things. People just now, and a perfect example is COVID, but people now just roll over on their back and put their feet in the air. It's insane. It's aggravating, quite frankly, to me, having grown up not only questioning things, but being encouraged to question stuff and to be encouraged to not believe the BS that's just thrown on the table and dig through it and see what's actually there. Because a lot of that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen, obviously, in a great number of what we call our media today. There's some outlets out there that do digging, that actually try to confront the truth and come up with it. But to your point, they're immediately garnered and handed a tinfoil hat, and away we go, right? So I'm not quite sure where any of this is headed at this point.
No, and that's good because David, it means you're paying attention and you're thinking about, the fire hose of confusing facts, information, claims, interpretations, which is very intentional to disorient us because then we give up. If you can't figure something out, people tend to just stop. Do whatever you want. I don't care. I can't figure it
Right.
out. And that's a huge danger that so much of the population feels that way. And worse, by measures of despair and drug addiction, alcohol abuse, and suicide attempts. It's off the charts compared to what it was before COVID.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's good to get up to speed about things like that with conversations like this and with books like mine and to grope for the heroes. And I repeat, John F. Kennedy is an amazing,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
inspiring, story or
Yeah.
example of just a
Yeah.
human being like you and me who made his decisions and how, the more of us who do likewise and bring attention to these things and then start discussing what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? That's the endless need and quest. Well, what can we do? What can we do? May that never stop. You know,
Right.
well, I want to mention a number of, I follow people who cover this stuff all the time and frequently they report I don't see them because just my circles, but where I work and my routine, I don't see lots and lots of young people who are wide awake and don't believe the nonsense and this, that, and the other thing. But
No.
that's very plausible when you look at even the mainstream surveys of trusting the government or trusting the media. Those numbers are down in the garbage where they belong. Okay. And yet that's hand in hand with that apathy and that ennui and that despair and even that suicidal despair. So that's a pretty good broad summary of like, okay, where are we and what's going on? Well, that's where we are and that's what's going on.
Yeah. And I would say, if anybody really wants to challenge that, all they really have to do is look at the manipulation of COVID and see just exactly how well it was orchestrated, because you cannot ever convince me that a prime minister in France is getting the same bullet points to read as the governor of Michigan. And that's exactly what happened. Those bullet points were generated and distributed globally, predicated on the outcome of what they were trying to do. And anybody that would even attempt to scratch the surface in that whole scenario would come to the same conclusion if they had an open mind about it, because you can't convince me. I mean, we're in the middle of epic fury, and you can't get the NATO nations to help with safeguarding boats going through the Strait of Hormuz. But yet during COVID, all of those NATO nations were reading off the same damn sheet of music that the state governors here were reading. It was the same crap. And you can't tell me that that's not an orchestrated effort to do that. Everybody just jumped behind the Pied Piper. Now, there were a few religious holdouts. There were a few pastors that basically stood up and said, "No, you're not going to close our church." And one of them, I believe, even went to jail over it. But you cannot convince me that that was not a manipulated event. You just can't. You can't convince me that it wasn't a manipulated event.
And that year, 2020, is when my publisher agreed to publish my book. And he said, but it can't come out until the next spring. So I studied COVID and wrote a chapter called COVID-19 in my book. And even that first summer, there were news in the New York Times, even the New York Times, which is really an organ for the corporate oligarchs who want to fool us into their exploitive agendas.
Right.
I don't go to the New York Times for the truth. Even the New York Times in August of 2020 had a story where they looked at studies in Massachusetts and I think Indiana and also California, and they said looks like up to 90% of COVID results, the positives are false positives. Up to 90%. So, right that early, anyone looking, and then there were all the doctors who came out, so many who were blacklisted, blackballed, censored, deplatformed, demonized, demonetized. And now have been book after book after book after book that are showing, David, the Holocaust against humanity, that is
Yeah.
the injury, harm, disability, and deaths
Yeah.
sweeping the world from the bioweapon that is and remains the COVID shots. The virus was brought in to inflict the shots throughout humanity. Is that something you're aware of?
Yeah. And they haven't even begun to understand the long-term effects that shot is going to have on newborns, on humanity in general. They haven't even begun, and they did it knowingly. I mean, absolutely knowingly. And you know, the accountability for these people, and it's far-ranging. It's through the Pentagon, it's through Fauci, it's through God knows how many different people in the pharmaceutical industry and everything else. But there'll never be any real accountability for these people, and it's a shame because millions of people, died, and I don't know what the long-term effects are going to be to the newborns and stuff like that that came out of that event. I don't think anybody does yet.
Not even close.
Yeah,
Not even to the long term effect on the destruction of reproduction and the decline
right,
in birth rates and
right.
sterility and fertility in men and women.
Yeah,
It is, it's the biggest I could possibly imagine assault on the human species.
yeah,
And the enormity of it is breathtaking. And that's why every day that something doesn't blow up in the United States, like a city, and then they blame it on Iran to escalate the war and collapse our economy and destroy food production, and there's literal famine and the dollar's worthless, and then they handcuff us with digital programmable currency. And that is the technocracy, the technological enslavement that people like Catherine Austin Fitz at Solari.com, SOLARI.com, have been documenting for years. And in the face of this overwhelming threat, she still says, I don't think it's going to work. And she relies on her spiritual beliefs. I mentioned, I call it a spiritual imagination because what I think about our eternal nature and the power of prayer and spirit, and divinity, David, doesn't have to be true. It just has to make life easier for me and make me more loving and empowered. Okay. So that's why I always encourage folks to develop a spiritual imagination. Now, there's a lot of documentation that could support that, like the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of stories of people who had near death experiences come back and they say, this isn't ultimate reality. There's nothing to fear or worry about. There's no one to compete with. We're all brothers and sisters in this experience, this game, this illusion. And we're here to discover one and one thing only, love, because it's the one and one thing only that exists. Science calls it energy, the quantum field,
right.
consciousness. David, once we embrace all that, we really can face humans who kill to win and want to exploit us and this, that, and the other thing. And when enough of us can do this, we outnumber them. We will be
Yeah,
able to survive these threats and create new systems, etc., that foster life because life.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. I'm sure my audience is going, man, this is getting a little deep. Yeah, I know exactly. Your thoughts on Trump he's now going into his second year. Any thoughts given the 4 years that we had before him and now where we're at?
Yeah, this term is very different as I
Yeah.
see it. And my gut wants to just dismiss him as a horrible puppet at the, facilitating, as all presidents have since John F. Kennedy. They just facilitate, they do the best they can working for god awful powers that are doing all these horrible things to America, to the world, to exploit its people and resources and garner wealth for themselves for a really, really evil agenda of transhumanism and sickening us a la COVID. And yet, really smart people at a group called PrometheanAction.com, David, they constantly interpret everything that Donald Trump is doing as great for America, reestablishing our independence and national sovereignty, pulling us away from the globalism we fell prey to over the last 70 years, really. And that's not who and what I think he is. And yet I mentioned them so that people could dig into it, because on the surface, but this war here, the longtime researchers who say this is the global project being implemented through Israel and the United States, controlled by forces above Israel in the United States, pretty well situated at the City of London and the World Economic Forum, that kind of crowd coordinating things on a global level to more than likely really rearrange things at that cataclysmic level that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's rearrange is going to end up rearranging the deck chairs significantly. Whether it's to the world good remains to be seen. Obviously, to your point, and I agree that the people that are pulling the strings is going to be arranged to their benefit, whatever that benefit is, and it's really on us to come together and create an energy that basically confronts that and stops all of that. But for all of us to get to that point, I'm cautiously optimistic, that people can actually take their eyeball off of the new BMW and start paying attention to what the hell's really going on. I don't know if we're there quite there yet, Bruce, you know? Yeah, I just don't know if we're quite there. So for the people that are listening, your social media, let's get your social media stuff out there so people can reach out and touch you and understand and learn more.
Thank you. It all starts at my website, brucetorres.com. That's how people can get in touch with me, and that's where I have the most information about my book, which is my major personal offering. I'm on Facebook. I've got the settings at public so people can see what I post there. I've got a Substack, brucetorres.substack. Thank you. And, my work at the American Small Business League is really important. Wallets for mainstream the middle
Right,
class, which needs all the help it can get, because it's being, if not been, squeezed out of existence,
right,
which leads me into praising ever the American ideals of the American founding. They are not discussed. They need to be discussed because they are still worth working to recreate on this continent. They are largely gone, but where they are implemented helped us prosper and open paths toward happiness. They helped other nations of the world do the same, and they can still work for us today.
yep, I agree. Um, so your book, I'm assuming you've got your book on your website, God School 9/11 and JFK.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure everybody can find it on that wonderful Prince of a Person on Amazon.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, um, you know, it's been a great conversation. It's a conversation that I think needs to be held at the dinner table nightly. And I don't know that that's happening, but I wished it were, right? I wish people got around the table and discussed things that you and I just discussed. And it's my hope that what we've done here might start to facilitate some of that, because that's how I grew up in politics, was having these conversations with my dad and other people around the table. Even as a youngster, I was still allowed to have that conversation. Um, I don't know that kids relate to it, because you'd have to pry the damn phone out of their hands to do it. Uh, but I think it's possible, right? But it's going to take some discipline to get it done.
Yeah, and a relentless effort to instigate these kind of conversations, even with folks in their 30s and 40s, because many of them are as addicted to the phone, and
God, yes.
they're addicted to despair, they're addicted to entertainment as
Yeah,
much as an
yeah,
8-year-old or a 13-year-old, and
right.
it's okay. It is what it is. And, we who want to have these conversations, nothing's stopping us from trying to instigate them all the time. And a small percentage of folks, maybe not even a small percentage, will walk into these kind of conversations. As many as hopefully walk away from them.
There you go. Well, Bruce, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to have you back so we can continue this conversation. And hopefully, that when we talk the next time, some of this stuff will be maybe in a better light or in a better space than where it is right now.
That would be nice. I'd love to come back anytime. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Take care, Bruce, and have a great rest of the week, my friend.
Thank
You
you for
too.
listening.
All right.
If you would
Bye-bye.
like to listen to more
Bye.
Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaospodcast.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.